Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian Smith with Grief to Growth, and I'm back with an episode. Today I have with me Tony Woody. I'm going to read Tony's bio, and then we're going to have a conversation. Tony's had some fascinating experiences. I'm going to just go over it really briefly and let him tell his story, and then we'll talk about the experiences he's had. But Tony Woody is a U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer with 22 years of honorable service as an Instructor Flight Engineer on the P3 Orion aircraft. In 1982, during an emergency landing, the aircraft he was in suddenly departed the runway at just over 155 miles per hour, and the plane narrowly missed landing into a fire truck that was sitting just 100 feet off to the side of the runway. I'm going to let Tony tell the story, but at that point, Tony had what's called a spontaneous out-of-body experience, which is kind of like a near-death experience without actually physically dying. And that led to a series of spiritually transformative experiences, or STEs. And again, we'll go into those in more detail. But with that, I want to introduce Tony Woody and welcome you to the show.
How you doing?
Great, Tony. I appreciate you being here. What I want to do today is talk about your experiences, and let's start off with this first experience that you had. I heard you on Sandra Champlain's show. We were talking about before we got on the air, like 3 years ago. You were telling about this experience you had when you were on the plane and it veered off the runway. So if you could just take it from there and let me know what happened.
Okay. Well, what we were doing, the aircraft was a 70-ton, 4-engine heavyweight turboprop aircraft. Like you said, it's called the P3 Orion. They have the EP3 aircraft, which is the spy plane version of that aircraft, which I also flew missions in those. Mm-hmm. But we were I was stationed at Barbers Point, Hawaii Naval Air Station, and it was 1982, and we were on our way out as a crew, my 12 crew members, to go do a patrol for the RIM pack exercises. It's called RIM of the Pacific, which is probably one of the largest, or is, I think, the largest military joint exercise on the planet back then it was. And so it was my crew's turn to go do their 12-hour flight. We had a plane that we knew had been having engine problems on one of the engines before. It was making metal called a chips light. And but it kept checking out okay after maintenance. So we took it. I knew the problem existed and it could happen again. And we got out. Now we're heavy. We're going out for a 12-hour flight. So we loaded up everything, fuel, max load of fuel, everything, max allowable takeoff weight. And on climb out, we got to about 10,000 feet and chips light came on number one engine. And I called it out. We had to shut it down. And obviously we're not going to go do the 12-hour mission now. So we had to dump fuel, but you can't dump all you would like to get down to a max allowable land weight. Mm-hmm. If you exceed that, you could cause structural damage to the airplane if you hit too hard. Mm-hmm. So we had to fly around a while and declared an emergency. And on our approach, we were coming in on parallel runways, landing on runway 040 left. 040 was the heading. And because it's an emergency landing, they have fire trucks pre-positioned on the sides of the runway. 2 here and then 2 further down, and as you go past them, the next two will pull in right behind you and chase you down the runway, and then the next 2 behind them, and so on. And usually that's a great thing. That's what you want, to have those guys there immediately if you need them. Well, that day it was problematic. I think that's the way to put it. And we even, the pilot briefed the emergency landing. We did everything else right. He just put in incorrect rudder, thinking he was putting in, you expect a swerve to the right. You got an engine out on the left. You got more horsepower pulling you back on one side than the other, so you're going to swerve. Mm-hmm. And so you correct with the rudder. Well, he did correct with the rudder, but he corrected incorrectly. And the next thing you know, at those speeds, it's 135 knots, which is over 155 miles an hour. we departed the runway very quickly. And the next thing I know, I got death coming at me at 135 knots, and I knew it. And there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And I've never experienced terror like that before, or that much helplessness. There's just nothing I could do. And you won't believe how much goes through your mind when you know you've only got a couple of seconds, maybe.
Yeah, they say everything kind of slows down.
Oh, yeah. And nothing in my military training prepared me for anything like this. Nothing. So when that happened and I had that raw terror, the next thing I knew, I was outside the airplane, above everything, probably 30 feet or something like that, looking down on the whole scene. I could see everything. But I'm still in the chair, the flight engineer seat, which faces forward. So I got a 180-degree commanding view of the airplane. I'm the guy that shoves the power levers forward on takeoff after the pilot. He initiates it and he calls the engineer to finish setting power. So I've got a frontal view of all of this. And when we departed the runway, I knew I was going to die. I just didn't see any way out. There was no way out. And so the me in the airplane was still experiencing that terror. The me outside the airplane was just like an observer, calm, not fearing anything, just watching everything, I guess.
So you were co-located at this time, is that right?
Yeah, I was in multiple places at once.
Okay.
And trying to figure out what's going on. I'm very confused and scared and don't understand any of this. And then I started, the me in the flight station saw this Pepsi can fly by. I don't know where this thing, now we're off the runway. Wait a minute, before that, we're headed toward the fire truck. So the me that was outside, there's the front leading edge of the fire truck. I could see as we passed it, the number 4 propeller blade, one of the blades barely missed the front left corner of that fire truck, and then the other blade passed just behind it.
Wow.
I saw that. How could I see that? You know, clear as day, I saw it all. I saw the guy screaming on the water cannon on top of the fire truck. I could see him screaming to the top of his lungs. I was witnessing all of this, trying to figure it out. And we missed the fire truck. Somehow we just, by the grace of God, we missed it. And wingtip literally went over the truck. And we went at an angle from there all the way across the asphalt, headed toward the other runway. And it's a place where you're not supposed to be. There's no airplanes that taxi there or anything. It's just asphalt. It's not where nobody's supposed to be there in an airplane.
Right.
And there's a lot of debris and dust out there that doesn't get blown away off the runway, like from the planes, you know. And the next thing is the pilot started going into reverse thrust. Anything that was in the air being disturbed by the plane, I started seeing all of that too. I became these places. I was really confused and didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if I was dead already. I didn't understand. And we came to a screeching halt. Not screeching really, but we came to a halt on the other runway. We ended up rolling out on the other runway. Half the plane was the right main mount and the nose gear. It popped up on the runway, and the other left main mount still off. So there's a little slope there for the rain. So the plane's kind of sitting like this, and the engines are running. And the me that was outside and all of the different perspectives I was having at that time was going on all the way until the plane stopped. And then when it lurched to a stop, all of these different, I call it like a expanded consciousness or something. I don't know, fractured consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And it all pulled back into me. No noise, you know, I made that without.
Yeah.
But it just did that. And I'm like in the chair now with just one perspective right after all of this. And I'm just not understanding anything. And I turn and look at the co-pilot, Mr. Duffy. And I don't remember, to this day, I can't tell you if I actually said these words to him or we were just connected consciously.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like, because it was a very odd moment, and I wasn't prepared for any of that. So it seemed like I said to him, "Did you see that?" And meaning all of that stuff I just saw.
Right.
But he said like something like, "Yeah," but I knew he didn't know what I meant, and I didn't understand. I didn't know how to explain it to him in that moment. It was too much going on. And then I heard some sound behind me. And it's the pilot still on my left side, and I'm looking to the right. So I hear this woo, woo sound, and then I turn around to see what Mr. Lovegren's doing. He was the pilot that made the erroneous landing. Great pilot, but he gooned the landing that day.
Yeah.
And he's in stress. He's in post-traumatic stress, I think, and he's still panicking. He's got his hands on the yoke, and they're white knuckling the yoke, and he's going, straining his face. He's going, woo, woo, and he finally goes, "What the F did I do wrong?" And his voice is shaking, and I'm like, I just didn't know what to say. And we ended up literally, then the fire trucks caught up to us, but the me that was outside could see them all chasing us, trying to catch up before I ended up back in the seat, just being me. And after we figured out there was nothing wrong with the airplane, we added power and taxied out and got up on the other runway to finish the rollout. So I did a 3-engine emergency landing and started it on one runway and then finished it on an entirely different runway.
Wow.
And I really don't ever want to do that again.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand all of that. I just was kind of in a funk the rest of the day, a little bit of a shock. I just trying to understand. I didn't say anything to anybody that day. I didn't know what to say. So I just went home, and then the next day, the skipper took me and the pilot that made the bad landing. We went back out to go shoot touch and goes. And I didn't think anything of it. I mean, by that time I already had probably 4,000 flight hours. So I was a pretty experienced flight engineer by then. And I'd never had a problem before. So I didn't know I was going to have a problem. We went out to go flying. The skipper's in the right seat. And my chair is a little bit aft of the pilot's chairs. But when I bend over, my head, all you can see is the co-pilot, which would be the skipper, could only really see the back of my head or the side. You can't see my face when I'm pushing the power levers up or preparing to. So one of the things a flight engineer has to do is, in case it's a wave off, that's my job to shove the power levers. So I leaned forward to do that. Normally I would just sit up on the approach after we got in the air to make the landing and just have a 180-degree commanding view and see everything, right? And so we started making the approach, the same one we did the day before on the same runway, and I started having post-traumatic stress anxiety, and I didn't understand what was going on then either. I just never heard of that. It's back in 1982, they didn't, something like that happened back then. They didn't take you to the psychiatrist and have you do none of that. They put you back on the horse and see if you could ride again.
Right.
And that's literally what happened. So I knew if the skipper saw my face and knew I was emotionally, mentally not there and ahead of the airplane, because that's the last thing you want to do is let the plane get ahead of you. And so I had to work through those, and I leaned forward to acting like I'm prepared for a wave off on the whole approach, just because I couldn't look outside anymore. And after 2 or 3 landings, I had to talk myself through that. And then after that, I didn't have that problem anymore. So maybe that's the way to go about it. I don't do it that way, but, and then I know this doesn't sound connected, but I know somehow they are. And that day, by the way, I had that fear and that terror again on that approach. So I was feeling all those emotions. But the next day, on a Wednesday, and I know this sounds unrelated, but somehow there was a door opened up that day on that Monday, it was a Monday for the incident. Tuesday was the refly. Wednesday, I'm watching a television show on TV called That's Incredible. It had a guy on there named Leslie Lemke, and they were telling his story, and I won't get into the details of it, but I felt I was watching a miracle. I was seeing a miracle. I mean, I was 24 years old, and I didn't understand. I know now everything's a miracle, but I didn't know that at 24,
Right. Right.
And So I said a simple prayer that night before I went to sleep of just genuine gratitude of, Lord, literally it went like this, that I was grateful for having seen that miracle, and it'd be nice if you could do something like that for me someday. Careful what you ask for, you just might get it. And I went to sleep, and I didn't even say that prayer out loud. I was just on my back in bed, in my head, little 10-second prayer in your head. You know, who thinks something like that's going to make a big difference, right? And I don't know what time it was, like 3:30, 4 in the morning. We called it "Oh Dark 30" in the military. There was no tunnel that I went through or anything like that. It was instantaneous shift in my location of my consciousness. And the next thing I know, I'm in a black void and I'm looking right at the heart of God pouring out liquid, molten, golden white, living light that was blasting through me. And I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't even think. And I said 3 words. I said, "Oh my goodness." And the whole time what I was experiencing was the beauty. I've seen the most beautiful thing in existence, Brian. I was looking right at it. And the power, infinite intelligence and wisdom, which are one and the same. You can't have one without the other. And infinite unconditional love blasting out in all directions. Liquid, molten, golden white light that was infinitely graceful. Everything was like that. And the instant I said the word goodness, I said, "Oh my goodness." And I didn't understand. So I had the prayer, so that call got answered, right? God loves us so much, the call compels the answer. So that's why that happened. And excuse me, losing a little train of thought there. It's just, it was still overwhelming to me.
Yeah, I could tell. You know, it's just when people saw these stories, you can see you're going right back to where you were.
Yeah, it does that.
Yeah,
good, but it pulls me away from my focus.
So is your memory of this like it just happened yesterday?
Yeah, it can be like that. And so the love was off the charts. And but what I was experiencing first was profound unconditional love. That was the most amazing part of it. It was like God, the emotion coming from God's heart right to me, and then enfolded me and filled me up from inside. And I don't know how to explain that either. I don't know how to tell people what a place of spaceless space and timeless time looks and feels like while you're standing in the presence of your creator. But I'll tell you something, you darn well know it when you're there.
Yeah. Tony, I've heard so many people talk about near-death experiences, and what you've had is very, very similar, right? We don't know if your body was still functioning at the time, but you're in a, like you said, a placeless place and this infinite thing. So I understand it's difficult to explain, but just watching your face and hearing your voice gives me a little bit of a feeling of what you must have experienced.
Well, one of the analogies I use now and I knew how precious I was. There were so many things being said to me without any words. It was all a knowing. You just know. I was home, and I knew it. I knew this was home. I'd never felt like that before anywhere else about home, but I was home there, and there's no doubt about that. And there was this cosmic scale party going on. It was like all of that infinite power was perfectly balanced to the finest degree. And I'll get more into that a little bit later, but the love was so overwhelming. And when I said the words, "Oh my goodness," another call to God, I said something, "Oh my goodness," right? So the next thing I know, and I didn't know this till years later when someone explained it to me, all of this goodness blasted through me. And I was told by them that that's part of the goodness that I created over whatever lifetimes I've had. And that I said, "My goodness," right? So that's what I got. And I didn't know that at the time, but I thought it was God's goodness. It felt like it to me. But we're all part of God, so maybe it's the same thing. I don't know. But I got all of it. And then came joy, bliss, peace, ecstasy, harmony, anything positive and beauty, all of that, how precious I was. These were all emotions of that. God's intent from his heart for me to know that. And when the word precious, what I tell people about the love, the best analogy I've been able to come up with yet is, if you can imagine how that you're that precious, because God knows you're going to be the last newborn baby at the end of the life of the entire history of the universe. And the love is like being loved, held, and cradled by every mother that ever lived in every galaxy, everywhere, every when, throughout the entire history of the entire freaking universe, all at once. And it's powerful.
So, Tony, what were your thoughts about God before this happened? Were you surprised to have this experience?
Well, I grew up in East Texas in the Southern Baptist religion, so I had my belief system. Just challenged it in some ways, but it also solidified more of it as I learned more about ascended master beings, and Jesus is an ascended master being, and he is the one holding the door open. And I've learned a whole lot more about that since then through, the St. Germain Foundation, who is an ascended master. And that's when I found my answer about what happened to me. I'd been looking for over 30 years. 32 years by the time I first heard about Saint Germain. I'd never heard of him. Man, I read everything about any kind of my own religion. I studied everything I could about that. I'm an engineer, so once I get a focus, I'm going to tear it apart until I know the details.
Yeah, me too.
I can't help myself. That's the way I am. And so I did that about all my religion and others, and learned a lot of things that I didn't know that helped me bring me to greater realization. But the real answers came because that liquid molten golden white light I was telling you about is also called the sacred fire. That's a name for it. And so these books, the St. Germain Foundation, as I started reading them, they're called the St. Germain series, and there's 20 books, and they're not a religion. They tell how the story of how these books came to be and why they're important to mankind and why everybody needs to learn about this. But it's an education on how the energy that I experienced in the light works. It was pure energy there. It was intelligent energy, but it's pure energy state. And that's where I went. And it's so powerful that if God wants to yank your consciousness out of this dimension and into another one and put it back at will using the power of thought alone, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And that's what happened to me. So I want to before we finish the St. Germain stuff, I want to get back to what happened in the bedroom.
Yes, yeah.
When that shift happened and I'm just dumbfounded, I don't know if it was an instant or eternity. There's no difference. I call it my moment in eternity. You can't tell. It's the same thing. And sorry.
So you're experiencing this infinite love, wisdom, the light. You're feeling cradled, and you were talking about the flame, the flame that you were seeing or you experienced.
What happened in the bedroom? I'm seeing this light, and the next thing I see, and I didn't want to think. I didn't want to be anywhere. I didn't think about my wife or family. None of that can happen. You just can't. You're just. Consciousness is filled with this. And I started seeing these hands out in front of me start to, in my peripheral vision, start to materialize, I guess you want to call it that. And then more started materializing outside of that, and it was the bedroom that I was in. And I had sat up in bed, not knowing this, and I had my arms out, reaching to the light, not knowing that. And then as more of the room came in, I could see my wife's back was to me because I could tell by the position of her feet. And And I remember thinking, how can she sleep through this? It's like a billion stars in the room. You know, I mean, it was so bright. How can anybody sleep through this? And then that's when it struck me that this is real. This is really happening to me. I'm not asleep. I'm not dreaming. I'm awake, and this is happening. And the moment I think God knew. The moment God knew, I knew. The outer circle. And this circle was big. It was probably 10 feet or so. That took the whole wall at the other end of the room away. It was just gone. And between that, on the other side of that wall, was my son's. He was about 3.5 years old. Was his bed. And I'll say more about that later.
Okay.
But the instant I realized it was real, it started shrinking down about that speed, about 1.5, maybe 2 seconds max. It went from 10 feet and then went away. And that's when I just broke down.
Yeah.
Because I was grieving, not understanding that. I was grieving the loss of the greatest love I'll ever know. And I wasn't told anything verbally. I didn't know why it happened to me. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. I didn't understand anything.
So I want to make sure that I understand. So you found yourself in the presence, you're in the void, and then you saw the light, the flame and the light. So were you co-located? Were you seeing yourself back in the bedroom again? So you were in both places?
No, not that time. It was just my perspective from.
Okay, so after you found yourself back in your body in your bedroom, then you saw the portal.
Yeah,
okay.
It was just like my eyes never changed perspective as far as the view. It's just the room around me changed. So it kind of came back. I don't even know how to explain that.
Yeah, you did. You explained it very well.
And so what happened after that? So when that happened, you know, there was this undulating light, residual light, like left in the wall. And I just sat there, cried, praying for it to come back, begging it for it to come back in my mind. I didn't want to wake my wife up because she'd probably think I was crazy. And then as the sun came up, that faded away. And then she did wake up, and then I'm still crying. And she's like, "What's wrong with you?" I didn't even, how do you explain that, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then that was Wednesday. And then Sunday, I needed answers. You know, it was eating at me a lot. And I didn't talk to anybody, her or anybody. She knew something happened, but she wasn't sure. I can't remember if I told her or not, but so that following Sunday, we went to the Y&I Baptist Church on the west end of the island. We were living in some apartments that were out that way anyway, so it was just a few minutes from our apartment. And that particular week, our pastor was out of town, and they had a guest pastor there. He was a younger guy, and kind of reminded me of Christopher Reeves when he was young. He played the first Superman, you know, but not the very first, but the movie ones, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was able to express to him what I experienced and what happened, but I was crying. You know, it was years before I could tell a story without breaking down crying. I still get affected, but I mean, I couldn't talk about it. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And, but he understood me, and I knew he did. And he kind of just tilted his head and looked at me kind of oddly and turned his back on me and walked off. Left me standing there. So now it's 2 times in 4 days I've not been told anything.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand. And then a week later after that, went to a different church, and I thought maybe I'd get an answer there because I didn't know. I just thought the church would have the answers.
Of course. Yeah.
And I now understand that they didn't have the answers any better than I did. They just didn't know what to say. So when that pastor turned away from me, the first one, that caused a moral injury in that moment that I wasn't prepared for. And it made me angry because I didn't understand. I deserved an answer. That's just the way I felt about it.
Yeah.
But I now know that was, I shouldn't have done that because he didn't have an answer. So I just assumed he did.
Yeah. Well, to kind of put this in perspective, I mean, this was 1982. I think the term near-death experience was coined like in the late 70s. I'm assuming you probably hadn't even heard that term.
Not then. I didn't even learn about that until I don't know, many years later when I found a book called Lessons from the Light by Kenneth Ring.
Yeah.
Ring. And that was the first time that's when I realized I wasn't alone. And because I went for a long time wondering if I was the only one that knew.
Right.
But here's what else happened is that as this lieutenant commander at that church, with that second church we went to, there's this time when the pastor says, "Is any concerns? Anybody want to talk?" Right? So people raise their hands or whatever, and I did too. And he called on me, and I'm trying to get up, and my wife is grabbing. She knows what I'm going to say. She's grabbing my right arm, and she's hard, and she's trying to pull me back down. And I jerked away from her. I said, "Let go of me." The whole church saw this. It was like 500 people. It was a big church, and then I said what happened, and then I got this answer from the pastor, and that's when I realized it was a pat answer, I guess if you want to call it that. I don't know what to call it, but I knew it wasn't what I was looking for. So I just sat back down, and then later as we're leaving the church, we're out in the parking lot, and this lieutenant commander came up to me who knew of me. He was in a different squadron, but he knew I was air crew and flew because he'd seen me out on the ramp before, flight ramp, and he came up to me and said, "I probably wouldn't be a good idea for me to keep talking about this kind of stuff because if I did, I'd probably lose my security clearance and they wouldn't let me fly anymore." And that was it. I love flying. Nobody was going to take that job away from me. I didn't care what. And I clammed up. I didn't talk about it for a really long time, which is a mistake because that won't remain bottled up. I don't care who you are or how strong you think you are.
Yeah.
And I've had some of the most elite training in the military, okay? Deep water survival training where you're upside down with 15 other guys in a helicopter trainer dunker that dumps everybody in the water and flips upside down while you're wearing a blindfold and you all have to get out the same hole. Okay, that's the kind of training I've done. POW training called survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, SEER school training. That kind of stuff. So I'm a very strong-minded individual, but not that strong.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine how alone you must have felt. I mean, because you're like this. Has anybody ever experienced this before? And you have these two experiences in basically 2 or 3 days.
And it was about 10 years later before I realized I wasn't alone when I read that book.
Right.
In 82, you didn't have the internet. You know, I didn't go to libraries. I was a 24-year-old flight engineer doing my job and busy doing that kind of stuff, you know, and being family and all of that. I wasn't really a reader for fun back then, although I did read some, but it wasn't about that topic. I didn't even know the books out there existed for that until a decade later when I found Ring's book.
Right.
So it was kind of the way it went, just the way it went. But that clamming up causes problems, and that ended up costing me a marriage and everything because I wasn't adapting well.
Yeah. Needed
answers, and I didn't know what to do. And then years later, as I learned more and more over the decades, I ended up learning about the St. Germain Foundation when a lady named Lily had brought it to me. And I was talking about in these books, it's just the way the words spoke to me because of the things they said, talking about how it's an education on how we get the energy from God. You've heard of people that have had near-death experiences. I had what's called a near-death-like experience.
Right.
I didn't have any injuries. I didn't, any of that. But that you don't have to have that.
Yeah, you know, I had a friend years ago that had he had 2 spontaneous out-of-body experiences with no even death thing. But we do hear near-death experiences that sounds common to yours is a lot of times people will leave their body before the actual injury happens.
Right.
So it's like you anticipated I'm going to die, and you just popped out.
I think that's kind of what happened to me in the airplane when I thought I was about to slam into the fire truck. But for some reason, I kept more than one perspective going on. That I don't know. That was God's doing. I was just there for the ride.
Yeah.
So where was I?
So you're talking about you're feeling alone and you're having trouble processing this, which is a very common thing. Also, people think.
And so over time, you know, I grew in my spiritual growth and started learning more, reading more. My focus became more about trying to learn. I'm an engineer, so I needed to learn how does God do all this? How can I physically be here? So I wanted to go figure that out. which was cool. And I learned all about subatomic particles and Planck time, Max Planck. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I learned all that stuff from the Big Bang, what we think is the truth. I think I saw the Big Bang, actually, but all the way to, and nobody can tell you, mankind can tell you how subatomic particles pop in and out of existence from nothing, assemble themselves into atoms, assemble themselves into molecules, assemble themselves into cells that make your body, and then assemble a body that you can exist within, and then everything else around you. So how does that work? I learned a lot, but it didn't really give me the answers I was looking for. Gave me a good foundation. It was kind of, in a way, a waste of time, but I needed to do that. It was what I needed to do. And it just, until I found these books, I didn't have an answer on how the energy works and how it is we're all here to get the final part of that answer.
Wow.
So you've heard people talk about having a near-death experience where they go through the tube or the tunnel. Well, the Saint Germain books call that the tube of light. That is the light that God is giving to us. It comes down to us in a perfected state. I know perfection exists because I experienced it. Okay. In essence, I ascended into a perfected state and then was put back. All right. So I knew the standard I was looking for. So all the other books and religions and everything else I looked at, they all of them had spiritual principles that applied to what I experienced on the other side, but they also all had man-made agendas that I knew didn't apply, because what happened in the light was, it was all, nothing negative is allowed to be expressed there at all in the presence of the Creator. Nobody is going to interfere with God's perfect meditation room. And so you don't get to go in there and join God with any kind of negative, any expression. I don't know how else to put it, which is the intent of your heart, which is also an expression. So when we vent anger or we vent stuff like that, none of that's allowed. So part of why we're here, because if we want to be with our Creator forever and stay in that ascended master state and work with, co-create with God for the purposes of glorifying God and helping God assist in completing the plan of perfection, which is what's going on. I didn't know all of that either until I started learning about Saint Germain and reading in these books and learning about it. And it all made sense because of what I experienced there. But all the other religions I looked at had a man-made agenda in them, and I knew that wasn't the whole truth.
Okay.
And if it wasn't all truth, from what I experienced, I really wasn't. I moved on from it.
Okay.
And if it had an ism behind it, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, I looked at all of them in depth. But I still know Jesus was important, and I needed the Saint Germain Foundation's finished that for me too, the books, because he is the one that's holding the door open. He's the one showing us why love is important and how to get out of this world that we're living in, so we don't have to keep coming back here doing this over and over and over again. And the sinister force is real, and what that is like I said, when God sends us our light for us to use for our existence, that we're using, that's borrowed, it's a gift, okay, it comes to us in a perfect state. And then we requalify that energy with our imperfect thoughts that mankind has, because we've turned our attention away from God and think we know everything, I guess. I don't know. But whatever happens or why ever it happened, when we requalify that energy, we are co-creators. So we're assisting in the co-creation of our reality. So people, I learned from all this that every difficulty that I'm going through, I created of my own self and or mankind collectively. So there is a collective psychic energy force around Earth that we all walk, swim, and breathe in, think in all the time, that we all co-created. And now you know why there's so much chaos in the world. That's not what God intended at all.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have that question. If there's this perfect God, then why is there so much pain in the world? And I
We
think you
did
just
it
answered that.
to
Yeah,
ourselves. Yes, sir.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the only way out of this is to keep our attention on God and follow these principles. And I started doing these decrees and things like that. There's a bunch of books. It's like, grab one of them over here. Hang on.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I don't know if you can see this, but there's the I Am Decrees books, and there's all kinds of decrees in here. And I am is the two most powerful words in the universe, because when you use the word I am, you are invoking the power of the mighty I am presence within you.
Interesting.
Okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and there's a ton of these books, and they're thick, And so, I was concerned at first, wondering about, because Jesus is very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the idea, well, is Saint Germain taking his job? Is that how? Well, I didn't like that idea. That's not what's going on. As I read more and learned more, ascended masters always work in perfect harmony together.
Mm-hmm.
There is no competition. None of that's man-made stuff. Again, it's not what God believes. But of those books, they all got dictated to mankind back in the 30s, I think it was, with Mr. and Mrs. Ballard. And one of those books is book 17, and called the I Am Discourses, the Saint Germain series, and that whole book is Jesus's words.
Okay.
And so that helped me a lot to figure out how this all fit together. Mm-hmm. There are many and many other ascended masters, Archangel Michael, a lot of them, and they're all there working for God to help bring us home and get us awake and get us out of this dark shadows of the universe that we live in. And that's where I've come with all of this.
Yeah.
Now I've had other experiences because of these studies.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think you've had a couple of other experiences since the one we talked about in the bedroom. So tell me about those.
One of them happened in 2017. I have injuries in the military, so I get massages, and there's a lady I'd been seeing for a couple of years, and we'd become friends, and this was in the fall of 2017. Mm-hmm. Now on May 4th of that year, I'd been in a car accident and got really hurt. I didn't get anything broken, but I got hit sitting at a red light, so at 45 miles an hour. Mm. So that's a lot of force. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, she had been working on me for a while, and I was fighting with Veterans Administration over stuff, and it was difficult. There was a lot of things that happened that shouldn't have happened that they did to me. I now understand it all, but they cut care from me, and I needed her. She was really helping me, mm-hmm. and I was learning from these books at the same time, so the energy I was pulling in was helping me heal.
Yeah.
And I got really excited because I had found for the first time, remember I told you I've been reading for decades trying to find answers?
Right.
Nowhere had I ever read these words in one sentence, much less the same book. It called the place I went the Great Silent Chamber. Perfect analogy of that place. Mm-hmm. There was no sound whatsoever. People say, well, that's God's perfect meditation room. People say, well, when I meditate, I don't hear anything, it's all quiet. Really? Is it? You hear your heartbeat, you hear your breathing, not there. Perfection, silence, perfected. Mm-hmm. All right. Like I said, everything there's perfected. There's nothing that isn't. Mm-hmm. So where was I?
We were talking about the experience that you had.
Oh yeah. So that energy is unmistakable. Mm-hmm. It's a commanding, and infinitely tender, but infinitely powerful and in command energy. Mm-hmm. I don't even know how to put that into words. It can take over your mind, your will, and your body. Okay. And this is what happened to us. Okay. Actually, I want to bring this up. See if I can read that, if I can find it. No, that's not it. I'm going to tell you the story, then I'm going to read this page that I sent to her after it happened to us.
Okay, great.
And then I'll read you what she said.
Okay.
So I'm on my back and she's working on my right hip and thigh. And she had been going through some life struggles and we were friends by then. So we were, helping each other get stuff off our chest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm on my back and she's working on my right thigh and hip. And I had my head up off the table so I could look at her, and she's looking down at me, working on me. And I said the words that I was excited, and I found that not just the great silent chamber, but these words were in the book too, when it called it the liquid, molten, golden, white, living light.
Oh, wow.
And I said those words to her, and the instant I said the word light, profound, infinite power of divine peace enfolded and expanded. I could feel it pushing out in me. It was expanding within me. And all I could do is, it cut my voice off. I could not talk anymore. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't do anything. I just dropped my head back on the table and I was crying with tears going down the side of my head because my head's laying flat, right? And it went on for a long time. I have no idea how long, but it's clear it's divine power. There is no mistake.
Okay.
And when it finally subsided, I raised my head up off the table and I looked at Rosalind. I said, "Did you feel that?" And she was 7 months pregnant and was going to have a baby boy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
She had already named him. And she goes, "Uh-huh." And Noah did too.
Oh, wow.
So it went through all three of us. So this isn't just happening to me. It's happening through me to others. And then that VA problem I was telling you about, that escalated into a point where there's now an FBI investigation going on because of what they did to me. So I don't want to get into the details of that because it's still an ongoing investigation, but it is going on.
Okay.
When I went to go interview with the two agents, both female agents, and they're probably mid-40s, I think. It was in Bedford, New Hampshire at the field office there. And they have their own security protocols they have to go through because it's a government federal facility, right? And so they told me, they let me in. There's a cipher lock door that they go in through. So they let me in there. And then there's another one behind that I don't get to go behind because that's called the SCIF, the Specially Compartmented Information Facility. There was another little room around the corner for interviewing, but in the room too was a metal detector. And so before I went there, I told them that I wanted to wear my flight suit there in my uniform because I wanted them to know who I am. And I had other reasons I won't get into with you, but they were fine with that. Well, when you're wearing a flight suit, there's zippers everywhere, right? I got all kinds of metal in my sleeves and arms, dog tags, steel-toed flight boots with all the metal eyelets on it. I got metal everywhere.
Right.
And so they told me I've got to go through the protocol and walk through the metal detector. And I'm like, well, I said, it's going to light up like a Christmas tree. I literally said those words to them. They said, well, you still got to do it. So they're off to one side of the room and I turn around and walk over and around and I walk through the metal detector. And it doesn't do anything. And I turn around and look at it, maybe thinking it's a delayed action or something. So I look at it and then I turn back and look at them and they're both staring at me with their jaws hanging open. And I kind of did that,
Wow.
And then they look at each other, but I had said a prayer before I went there. And I said, Lord, I need you to give me a sign that I know that I can bring up my spiritual reasons and when the time's right in this interview. And what happened. And
wow.
Okay. And so I told them about being in the light. They know everything. All right. So God picked me for this mission.
Right.
I'm not going to fail this mission.
I can tell you're determined. Yeah.
Yeah. I will not fail this mission. This is protecting other people's lives and getting rid of criminals that are harming not just people. This is what Jesus meant when on the cross, when he said, forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. I know my consciousness is connected to everything and everyone's consciousness. So if I don't go do the right thing to try and stop these people from hurting others, then I will own that, and I will experience the other people's pain when I have a life review that I could have stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I am relentless because it's also harming God's heart. Everything we do, God knows instantly and feels instantly, all of it. Mm-hmm. And so when I walked through that thing, and they looked at each other, and they look at me with their jaws drawn open, and then they both of them, it was funny, they both turned their heads at the same time to look at each other, because I'm looking at them from about 10 feet away. Mm-hmm. And then one says to the other, "Is it on?" Meaning, I guess, is the
sure
plugged in, And she goes, the other one says, I think it is. And then all of a sudden she kind of does that and makes a pivot and walks past me, and she's just wearing her normal clothing, right? Mm-hmm. Just pantsuit, hardly any metal on. I must have 20 to 30 times more metal on me than she did.
Yeah.
Goes around, walks through, and it goes off. And I'm just like,
wow.
I said, "You want me to go through it again?" And she just looks at me and she goes, "No," just like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, in my mind and in my heart, I'm going, I know what that's about.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that happened too.
Mm-hmm.
These things are still happening. And when I do my decrees, I can feel the energy flowing through me. And the idea that I have figured out is when I was in the light, I was not functional there. I was overwhelmed with it all. I just dumbfounded to a point of being stupefied into just going, not like a drug person, but I don't know how to put those into words, but it's so powerful. There's no cognitive ability going on.
Taking it in, yeah.
It unfolds your mind too. Like I said, your will, body, and mind, all of that is one with it.
Yeah.
So to learn how to, I think this is a training ground, and these books are the course manual. I call them my flight manual now.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're instructions, just like my flight manual for flying in the airplane was instructions on how to do this to stay alive and continue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is how to become an ascended master, so that we don't have to keep coming back here doing this chaos over and over again. And that psychic force of sinister force that was created by mankind that we're all in, it takes a lot of work to punch our way out of that. Mm-hmm. But the light's always coming to us, but it will not interfere it will not upset our free will. Mm-hmm. We are given free will. So until we ask and start making that connection, it'll never change.
Yeah. So Tony, clearly you're on a mission now. You're on a mission to bring that light. I'm sorry?
One of them is to achieve my own ascension, the original divine way, so I don't have to go through that thing we call death anymore, and I can stay in a conscious living state with my Creator constantly at all times, doing things on a cosmic scale. That is what I'm supposed to be doing. That's not here. Mm-hmm. And the other one is to protect life. There's a law on the other side that I instantly knew. It's called the law of life, and it's automatic. It repels anything that's not of itself, which is love and life, and they're the same thing. And so that's part of what we're trying to all do. And these books explain how to do that. They describe literally how to do it, what to do, what to say. And as I thought when I first started doing them, I'm like, this is, I felt silly. I'm an engineer and I'm reading out these decrees aloud because.
So are these like what we call these affirmations or mantras? Would that be appropriate? Or
different reasons for them? You've got decrees, which I'm doing a lot right now, which are for America.
Okay.
All right. There's a couple of books on that. And these are just these are antiques. The other books are more comprehensive now. But then you've got the cosmic light decrees that I experienced. Okay. What we are basically, I saw something called the Great Central Sun. Mm-hmm. That's another name for it. So there's books, it's called the I Am Sun Decrees. You've got the Violet Consuming Flame Decrees. That explains a lot on how that energy can purify us.
Wow,
and process on how to do that. So as I've been learning these things, more and more is happening. I got I am light decrees.
So
I am ascension decrees. Each one of these have a different purpose.
And what's the source of these books? Where did they come
From
from?
the St. Germain Press.
Okay.
StGermainPress.org. And Germain is spelled Germain. There's no E on the end of it.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
And
St.
were these channeled or
yeah, I'm not sure channel's the right word.
okay.
If you go to St. Germain Foundation, you can .org. You have stgermainpress.org and stgermainfoundation.org. Press is where you do the sanctioned books that they approve of, and then the other one is more information about the foundation itself.
Okay. Yeah. And
right now, the first 3 books that are there that explain how these books came about, the magic presence, and I'm drawing a blank on the other 2 names right now. I read those first, and I kind of read between the lines. It tells the story, but it also had information in there that resonated with me. And that's when I knew I was reading the truth as far as I could tell. And so I started studying the books, just doing it. And so I was feeling silly about it, when I was doing the decrees, right? Until this VA stuff happened. And I quit caring if it was silly or not.
Yeah.
Put my whole heart into it. I don't see it over here right now, but I pretended like I'm holding Archangel Michael's blue flame sword in my hand. And I'm cutting all of these lines of discord. I'm calling it out, decreeing that God cut all the lines of discord from anything that has anything to do with the VA and what they're doing to me, and have it burned back to them like a lit line of gunpowder, and it explodes in their faces. And I envisioned that. And so when we decree for something that's positive, good, and constructive, God will go out of his way to make it happen, and in a way that everybody gets their love lessons. So I don't go into this with resentment or anything toward anybody, because then I'm no better than what I'm claiming I'm trying to fight. Yeah. And so I have to keep my heart clear when I handle these situations. Yeah. And maintain a poise about myself that requires focus and purpose.
So Tony, what would you say to someone that says, "What's the purpose for us being here? What are we on here on Earth to do?"
To achieve our ascended master state, so we don't have to come back here and deal with these hard lives. Okay. And to be able, that's our home, and that's where we belong. That's what God wants for us. That's our destiny, whether any of us know it, believe it or not. Nobody is going to be left behind. God's love is too great for that, and God's patience is infinite, and God's heart is relentlessly in love with you. And God's insanely in love with all of us. I had no idea love could be like that when I was there, and what we're trying to do is to become that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said that. It reminded me. I started off as a Christian, and I got into something called Christian Universalism, and I read a book by a guy named Thomas Talbot, and it was called The Inescapable Love of God. And I know some people believe that, okay, so we come here, we have one chance, we get it right or wrong, it's binary, we go to heaven or we go to hell, it's an eternal thing. And what this book was basically saying is like, no, God's love will not let anybody escape. And that God is infinitely patient, as you said, and infinitely loving. Right. And if he has to give you a chance to do it over and over and over again, then he's going to give you that chance. Is that what I hear you saying?
And many chances, nobody's left behind.
Yeah.
Nobody. And these books teach how we are re-embodiment. It's not reincarnation, it's re-embodiment. Reincarnation means you can come back as something else, an animal or something. Not this, you keep coming back in a human form, but different each time. It's like a coat, you can take it off and put a new one on, and it looks different. Oh, I got a new coat today. So I'm tired of all the coats. I want the armor. I want the light of armor. And I don't have to wear a coat anymore. And that's what I'm working towards. And these books teach how to do that. And it's working. Flat out working.
That's awesome. Well, Tony, I really appreciate you you sitting down and taking the time with me today to tell me about your story and what you've discovered, and the hope that you give to people that, you know, we're all part of God and we're all going back home, you know, eventually. And if we have to do it over again, I guess we'll do it over again. But hopefully we bypass some of that. I'm sorry.
I'd rather not.
Yeah, I think, well, I deal with a lot of parents who've had children, you know, pass, and most of us say, I don't want to do this again. This is a hard life. This is a hard place to be.
You know, but there's infinite hope because there is a God. God is real. I
Yeah.
stood in the presence of my Creator, and believe me, you can't not know that when you're there. So that changed everything. But
Yeah.
what other thing I wanted to talk about was the moral injury side.
Mm-hmm.
And the gap in care that's going on out there.
Yeah, let's do that. Mm-hmm.
Where the like the frontline providers, doctors, nurses, ER, firemen, policemen, whatever situation you want to put it into, military, they're having these experiences all the time. This is happening every day.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these people have no understanding of what an NDE is,
Mm-hmm.
much less that there's after effects from having one.
Yes. Yeah.
Causes all kinds of emotional problems. And if they're not handled properly in the very beginning when someone's seeking help, which didn't happen with me, all I needed in the beginning, Brian, was validation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was it.
Right.
I didn't get that at all. I got ridiculed. I got told to shut up. I got everything but that. And that caused a moral injury that affected my life and a bunch of other people's lives because I was lost, really. And so Lilia coined this phrase. She was more knowledgeable about it than me, but called the gap in care, and I learned a lot of it from her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I spoke with about at the IONS conference, and that's when I met Bill McDonald.
Yeah.
But the gap in care aspect is critically important before any of this can be handled properly to prevent these moral injuries that I went
Mm-hmm.
through that affected not just me, but my wife, my son,
Yeah.
other people. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I think
It would have been so different if it had just been validated in the beginning.
that's very, very important. And I interviewed PMH Atwater not too long ago, and she was talking about the fact it takes most people 7 to 14 years to integrate the near-death experience, if not longer. And that, you know, there is this lack of understanding and not being able to talk to people, and people, it can create all kinds of issues for people. So you're absolutely right. We need to be able to care for those people who have that and to validate their experiences and to allow them to speak about them. And IONS is a fantastic organization, which we should probably mention here. I actually attend IONS meetings myself. I haven't had a near-death experience. But
just so people know what IONS means, it's International Association for Near-Death Studies, INDS.
Yeah, it's a great organization. So for anyone that's had an experience like this, it's a safe place to go talk about it. And I know you work with IONS, and you and I actually met through Lilia, who you've mentioned a couple of times, and Lilia is doing fantastic work also.
You know, because of her, I'm in a video now called Understanding Veterans' Near-Death Experiences with other veterans and some professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne Giesman's in there. I haven't worked with her yet.
Yeah.
Retired Navy commander.
I know Suzanne. Yeah.
And it's just been really good. But because of Lilia, last fall, I was asked by the National Institute of Bioethics, who's doing a summary write-up or something, I can't remember exactly what they called it, for the Johns Hopkins University Press at the Johns Hopkins University Hospital, you know, that idea. So it's about near-death experiences, and they selected 24 people's stories to be put up about the gap in care issue and how to, here's what's going on out there.
Yeah.
And so my story was one of them. But what was really cool, because God's always sending messages, you just got to be able to pick up on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or notice it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times for me, it's a synchronicity thing, or the timing or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to submit a 300-word summary, which is really hard to do, to tell a story like mine in 300 words. And I don't know how many people sent stories. I heard it was a lot, but if you got picked out of that 300-word group of people that sent in,
mm-hmm.
Then they had 24 people that were the finalists that were writing a 2,000 word summary.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wrote the first one, when I type, I've got Microsoft Word. I don't even look at the word counter. I just do it until I feel like it's done, and then I look.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 300 words right on the. I'm like, cool. That was,
Yeah.
I'm like, that's great. So I didn't have to type anything else. Then later I got selected for the second part, and I did the 2,000 word summary, and it happened again.
Wow.
So that's not an accident.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
I'm looking forward to seeing that when it comes out. I know
it was supposed to come out either this month or last month or this month. So I don't know if this coronavirus problem is going to slow that down or not. But that was the time span. So whenever it happens, I'll make sure Lilia gets you information to you.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Lily will let me know. Tony, I really appreciate getting the chance to meet with you and to, like I said, understand your story. The work you're doing is obviously so important. You're on a mission, and you're not going to fail. I can tell.
I'm just a messenger, man. I'm just a messenger.
All right, well, I'm going to let you go. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. Have a good day. Bye.
That's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you got something out of it. Please stay in contact with me by reaching out at www.grieftogrowth.com. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com. Or you can text the word growth to 31996. That's simply text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful day.